The morning started like any other Tuesday in June. People went to work. Children played in parks. The world moved forward, unaware that everything was about to change forever. At exactly 9:47 in the morning, every television screen on Earth went black. Every phone lost its signal. Every radio fell silent. For 17 long seconds, humanity was cut off from itself. Then the signals came back, and the sky was no longer empty. Daniel Carter was eating breakfast in the underground command center when the alarms started screaming. He dropped his coffee and ran to the main control room, where dozens of officers were staring at the largest display screen he'd ever seen, filled with red dots. "What am I looking at?" he demanded. Lieutenant Chris Morgan turned to face him. The young man's face was pale. "Ships, sir. Thousands of them. They just appeared out of nowhere." Daniel watched as the computer counted the hostile contacts. The number climbed higher and higher. 5,000. 8,000. 10,000. It finally stopped at 12,000. 140-3. 12,000 alien warships had surrounded Earth in a perfect sphere. Like a cage made of metal and fire. The message came 30 minutes later. It broadcast on every channel, in every language, to every corner of the planet. The alien who spoke called himself High Commander Zorth of the Vexery Dominion. His voice was cold and sharp, like ice cracking on a frozen lake. "People of Earth," he said, "you are surrounded. Your small fleet of 200 ships cannot fight us. You cannot win. You cannot escape. Surrender your planet, your people, and your resources to the Dominion. You have 1 day to accept these terms. If you refuse, we will destroy you. This is not a threat. This is a fact." The transmission ended, and the world held its breath. Daniel Carter had served in the military for 30 years. He had faced enemies before, but nothing like this. Nothing even close to this. Within 2 hours, the leaders of every nation had gathered for an emergency meeting. President Laura Mitchell sat at the head of the table, her hands folded in front of her. She looked tired, but her eyes were sharp and focused. "Let me make sure I understand the situation," she said quietly. "We have 200 ships. They have 12,000. Our best weapons might scratch their paint. And they're giving us 24 hours to surrender everything we are and everything we have." General Kevin Brooks nodded slowly. He was an old soldier with gray hair and a face full of scars. "That's correct, ma'am. The math is simple. If we fight, we lose. Badly." The room fell silent. Daniel could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. President Mitchell looked around the table. "Does anyone here think we should surrender?" No one spoke. No one moved. She waited a full minute before continuing. "I didn't think so." Ryan Torres, the Secretary of Defense, stood up from his chair. He was a big man with a loud voice, but when he spoke now, his words were soft and careful. "Ma'am, I've spent my whole life studying war. I've read about every battle humanity has ever fought. And you know what I've learned? We don't give up. We've been hit by plagues that killed half of us. We've survived ice ages and famines and wars that burned entire continents. Every single time, someone said it was the end. And every single time, we proved them wrong." He looked around the room at the other leaders. "These aliens think they can scare us with big ships and big numbers. They don't know us. They don't know what we are. They don't know that we're the species that crawled out of caves and reached for the stars. That we split the atom and walked on the moon. That we've been fighting since we could make fists." His voice grew stronger. "I say we show them. I say we fight. And if we die standing up, not kneeling down." The vote was unanimous. Every single leader from every single nation chose to fight. Daniel Carter returned to his ship, the USS Resolute, humanity's largest and most powerful carrier. It felt very small compared to what was waiting in orbit. His crew was already at battle stations when he arrived on the bridge. Commander Nicole Patterson, his tactical officer, was studying the enemy formation on her screen. She was young for her position, only 32, but she was the smartest officer Daniel had ever worked with. "What do you see?" he asked her. "Overconfidence," she replied without looking up. "Their shields are down. Their weapons aren't charged. They're not even running combat formations. They think this is already over." Captain Benjamin Cole walked over to join them. He commanded the destroyer squadron, 12 fast ships with big guns. "So they're underestimating us. Can we use that?" Nicole finally looked up. Her eyes were bright with something that might have been hope. "Maybe. They're expecting us to either surrender or make a stupid charge. They're not expecting us to be clever." Daniel nodded slowly. "Then we need to be very, very clever." Back on Earth, something strange was happening. When the alien message had first broadcast, people had panicked. There were riots in some cities, prayers in others. Some people ran to the hills. Others hugged their families and waited to die. But as the hours passed, the panic faded. It was replaced by something older and stronger, something that lived deep in the human heart. People started to fight, back in the only ways they could. Old factories that had been closed for years opened their doors again. Engineers who had retired long ago returned to their workstations. Scientists shared their research freely for the first time in history. Amateur radio operators set up networks in case the satellites were destroyed again. Farmers loaded their trucks with food and drove toward the cities. Strangers helped strangers. Enemies became friends. The whole planet, divided for so long by borders and languages and old hatreds, came together as one. Daniel watched the reports from Earth and felt his throat tighten. These people, his people, were not going to quit. They were not going to bow. They were going to stand up and face the darkness, even if it killed them. He turned to his crew and saw the same fire in their eyes. 20 hours until the deadline, he said quietly. "Let's get to work." The Vexery had 12,000 warships. Humanity had 200. But humanity also had something the aliens had never encountered before. They had hope. They had stubbornness. They had 8 billion people who would rather burn than kneel. The battle for Earth was about to begin. Admiral Daniel Carter had 18 hours to prepare for the impossible. He gathered his senior officers in the war room aboard the Resolute and locked the door behind them. "I'm not going to lie to you," he said, looking at each face around the table. "The odds are bad. Very bad. We have 200 ships against 12,000. Our technology is probably 100 years behind theirs. On paper, we should already be dead." He paused and let the words sink in. "But we're not dead yet. And as long as we're breathing, we're fighting. So I need ideas. Crazy ideas. Stupid ideas. Ideas that might get us killed. Because the normal ideas have already failed." Commander Nicole Patterson was the first to speak. She had spent the last 6 hours running battle simulations on the computer. Every single one had ended with Earth's fleet destroyed within hours. But she had noticed something interesting in the data. "The Vexery aren't treating this like a real battle," she said. "They're treating it like a victory parade. Their ships are spread out in a perfect sphere around Earth, which looks impressive but is actually a weak formation. Their shields are down to save power. Their weapons aren't charged. They're not even watching us closely. They think we've already given up," said Captain Benjamin Cole. "They're just waiting for the paperwork." "Exactly," Nicole continued. "And that gives us an opportunity. They're expecting one of two things. Either we surrender or we charge at them in a big, glorious, useless attack. They're not expecting us to be smart about this." Daniel leaned forward. "What do you have in mind?" Nicole pulled up a map of the enemy formation on the screen. Instead of attacking in one big group, we scatter. Each of our ships heads for a different part of their sphere. They'll have to split their attention 12 ways. And if we can create enough chaos, enough confusion, we might be able to do some real damage. That's still 200 ships against 12,000, Benjamin pointed out. Even scattered, we're going to get crushed. Unless we have something else, Nicole replied. Something that changes the math. 2,000 miles below, in a mountain research facility in Switzerland, Dr. Amanda Walsh was working on exactly that. Amanda was 45 years old and had spent her entire adult life studying physics. She had won awards. She had published papers. She had been called one of the greatest minds of her generation. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was the machine sitting in her laboratory. It was called the gravitational pulse emitter, and it had been her project for the last 7 years. The idea was simple. By creating a sudden, massive distortion in local gravity, the machine could disrupt electronics across a huge area. Ships caught in the pulse would lose power. Their systems would scramble. Their computers would crash. The problem was that the machine had never been tested at full scale. Amanda had run small experiments, but she had no idea if it would work against an entire fleet of alien warships. It might disable a few ships. It might disable all of them. Or it might do nothing at all. Her phone rang. It was President Mitchell. Dr. Walsh, I've read your reports on the pulse emitter. Can it help us? Amanda took a deep breath. Honestly, ma'am, I don't know. In theory, yes. A strong enough pulse should disrupt their electronics, at least temporarily. But I've never tested it at this scale. There are risks. Big risks. What kind of risks? The pulse might not reach far enough. It might not be strong enough to affect their technology. Or it might work too well and also disable our own ships. She paused. And there's a small chance it could destabilize the local gravity field enough to cause earthquakes on Earth. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. How long do you need to get it ready? The president finally asked. 12 hours if we're careful. 10 if we skip the safety protocols. Skip them. We need that weapon ready before the deadline. Amanda hung up the phone and looked at her team. They were exhausted. They had been working for 2 days straight. But when she told them what was happening, not a single person complained. They just nodded and got back to work. Across the planet, similar scenes were playing out. In Houston, engineers worked around the clock to arm satellites with nuclear weapons. In Beijing, scientists shared secret research on advanced shielding technology. In Moscow, hackers tried to break into the alien communication network. The whole human race was working together for the first time in history. Old rivalries were forgotten. Old borders disappeared. There was only one nation now, and it was called Earth. Admiral Carter received updates every hour. The pulse emitter was coming together. The scattered attack plan was taking shape. 100 small miracles were happening all over the world. But he knew it might not be enough. The Vexery had crossed the stars to conquer planets. They had done this before. They had done this 400 times before. Earth was just another meal to them. He walked to the observation deck and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, hidden in the darkness, 12,000 warships were waiting. Their crews were probably sleeping. Their commanders were probably bored. They had no doubt that tomorrow would be easy. Daniel smiled grimly. "Surprise is coming, you bastards," he whispered to the void. "You have no idea what's coming." Back in the war room, Nicole was finalizing the battle plan. She had divided Earth's fleet into 20 groups of 10 ships each. Each group would target a different section of the enemy sphere. Their goal was not to win a straight fight. Their goal was to create chaos, to buy time for the pulse emitter to do its work. We're calling it Operation Lighthouse, she told the assembled captains over the communication link, because we're going to shine a light that these aliens will never forget. Captain Cole smiled at that. I like it. When do we move? The deadline expires at 06:00 Greenwich time. We launch at 06:01. The pulse emitter will fire 5 minutes later. What's our escape plan? Someone asked. Nicole hesitated. If the pulse works, we press the attack. If it doesn't work, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Daniel stepped forward. If it doesn't work, we make them pay for every inch. We make this the most expensive meal they've ever eaten. We show the galaxy what happens when you corner a human being. 16 hours to go. The world held its breath. The fleet prepared for battle. And somewhere in Switzerland, a machine that had never been tested began to hum with power. The die was cast. For better or worse, humanity had made its choice. They would fight. They would bleed. And they would never, ever surrender. 6 hours remained before the deadline. Admiral Daniel Carter sat alone in his quarters, staring at a blank communication screen. He had been thinking about this moment for hours. Thinking about what to say. Thinking about what it might mean. The Vexri were expecting silence. They were expecting fear. They were expecting a broken species waiting to be collected like cattle. Daniel was going to give them something else. He pressed the transmit button and spoke clearly into the microphone. The message would reach every ship in the alien fleet. It would reach Earth. It would be recorded and remembered, no matter what happened next. High Commander Zorath. This is Admiral Daniel Carter of the United Earth Defense Force. I have received your terms. I have discussed them with my government. I have a response for you. He paused and let the silence stretch out. No. The word hung in the air like a stone. Simple, final, unbreakable. You asked us to surrender our planet, our homes, our children, our future. You asked us to become slaves so that you could strip our world and move on to the next one. And you gave us a deadline to accept, as if we were animals who could be rushed into a pen. Daniel stood up from his chair. His voice grew stronger. Let me tell you something about humanity, Commander. We have been on this planet for 300,000 years. In that time, we have faced extinction more times than we can count. We have survived ice ages that froze half the world, plagues that killed millions, wars that burned entire civilizations to ash, disasters that should have ended us 100 times over. He began to pace as he spoke, his words flowing faster now. And every single time, we survived. Not because we were the strongest, or the fastest, or the smartest, but because we are stubborn, because we refuse to quit, because when the universe tells us to lie down and die, we stand up and spit in its eye. You have 12,000 ships. We have 200. You have technology we can barely understand. You have experience conquering 400 worlds. By every measure, you should win. The math is clear. The odds are impossible. He stopped pacing and stared directly into the camera. But here's what your math doesn't account for. It doesn't account for the farmer who stays up all night loading trucks with food for strangers. It doesn't account for the engineer who comes out of retirement to build weapons she'll never see fired. It doesn't account for the 8 billion people down there who have decided, together, that they would rather die free than live as slaves. You want our surrender? Come and take it. You want our planet? Fight for it. But understand this, Commander. For every human you kill, you will pay a price. For every city you burn, you will lose something. And by the time you're done, you'll be wondering if Earth was worth the cost. He sat back down, his voice calm again. We're not afraid of you. We're not impressed by your numbers. And we're definitely not going to surrender. See you on the battlefield." The transmission ended. For a long moment, there was silence throughout the ship. Then, one by one, the crew began to cheer. The sound spread from deck to deck, from ship to ship, until all 200 vessels of Earth's fleet were roaring with defiance. On Earth, the speech was playing on every screen. People stopped what they were doing to listen. And when it ended, something remarkable happened. They stopped being afraid. In New York, construction workers climbed to the roofs of skyscrapers and hung banners that read, "We're still here." In Tokyo, elderly men and women gathered in parks to sing old war songs. In London, children drew pictures of Earth's fleet and hung them in windows. In 1,000 cities, in 100 languages, humanity declared its answer to the stars. No surrender. Not now. Not ever. High Commander Zorath received the message on his flagship. He listened to it twice, his face unreadable. When it was done, he turned to his second-in-command, a Vexery officer named Tolvak. "What do you make of this?" Zorath asked. Tolvak shrugged his massive shoulders. "Foolishness. They have no chance. They must know they have no chance. This is just noise before the end." "Perhaps," Zorath said slowly. "Or perhaps not. I have conquered 47 worlds myself. I have heard many surrender speeches and many defiant speeches, but I have never heard one quite like this. Does it change anything?" Zorath considered the question. "No, they will still be destroyed. But I think I will remember these humans. They are interesting." He sent a reply to Earth. His voice was colder now, touched with something that might have been respect or might have been anger. "Admiral Carter, your defiance is noted. It changes nothing. When the deadline passes, we will demonstrate the cost of your pride. Your species will learn what happens to those who refuse the Dominion." Daniel received the message and smiled. "They're angry," he told Nicole. "Good. Angry people make mistakes." 4 hours remained. The fleet was in position. Dr. Amanda Walsh had sent word that the pulse emitter was ready, or as ready as it would ever be. The whole plan depended on a machine that had never been tested and a strategy that had never been tried. But Daniel felt strangely calm. Whatever happened in the next few hours, humanity had already won something important. They had proven that they would not break. They had shown the galaxy what kind of species they were. He walked through the ship, talking to the crew. He shook hands with young sailors who were about to face their first battle. He shared jokes with veterans who had served with him for decades. He told them all the same thing. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm proud to serve with you. We're going to show these aliens something they've never seen before. We're going to show them what humans are made of." In the engine room, a young technician named Sarah looked up from her work. She was 23 years old and had only joined the Navy 2 years ago. She had never expected to fight a war. She had never expected to face death. But when Admiral Carter shook her hand and thanked her for her service, she felt something shift inside her. The fear didn't disappear, but it moved aside to make room for something else. Something stronger. Pride, defiance, the absolute refusal to quit. 2 hours before the deadline, Earth fell silent. People gathered with their families. They held hands and watched the sky. They waited for dawn and for battle and for whatever came after. Admiral Carter returned to the bridge of the Resolute. His officers were at their stations. The fleet was ready. "All ships," he said quietly into the communication system. "This is the Admiral. In 2 hours, we're going to do something impossible. We're going to fight an enemy that outnumbers us 60 to 1. Some of us won't make it back. I won't lie to you about that." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "But every single one of us will be remembered. Every ship, every sailor, every act of courage. 1,000 years from now, humans will tell stories about this day. They'll tell their children about the time we stood against the darkness and refused to blink. Make me proud. Make Earth proud. And let's show these bastards what humanity is made of. The countdown began. The stars watched. And 8 billion humans held their breath, waiting for the storm. The deadline expired at exactly 0600 Greenwich Mean Time. The sun was rising over the Atlantic Ocean, painting the water gold and orange. It was a beautiful morning. It might have been humanity's last. High Commander Zorath gave the order from his flagship. Begin the advance. Tighten the formation. Prepare to receive surrender or to deliver punishment. 12,000 Vexery warships began to move. The sphere around Earth started to shrink, drawing closer to the planet like a fist closing around a heart. The alien crews were relaxed. Some were already celebrating. This was supposed to be easy. They had no idea what was coming. Admiral Daniel Carter watched the enemy fleet on his screen. The moment the Vexery started moving, he gave his own order. All ships, execute Operation Lighthouse. Scatter and engage. Earth's fleet exploded into motion. 200 ships broke formation and flew in 20 different directions. Each group of 10 headed for a different section of the alien sphere. They were fast. They were desperate. And they were not where the Vexery expected them to be. The aliens had prepared for a simple battle. They expected the humans to charge forward in a single mass, making it easy to surround and destroy them. Instead, they found themselves facing attacks from every direction at once. What are they doing? Tolvac demanded on the Vexery flagship. This is not a battle strategy. This is chaos. Zorath frowned at his display. They're trying to confuse us. Split our attention. It won't work. Order all ships to raise shields and power weapons. We will crush them one group at a time. But raising shields and powering weapons took time. The Vexery had been so confident of victory that they had kept their systems in standby mode. Now, with human ships screaming toward them from all directions, they were scrambling to prepare. Captain Benjamin Cole led his destroyer squadron toward a cluster of enemy cruisers on the eastern edge of the formation. His ship, the Defiant, was at the front of the attack. All weapons free, he ordered. Target their engines first. We want to cripple, not kill. The more ships we disable, the more chaos we create. The destroyers open fire. Missiles streak through space. Energy beams cut through the darkness. The first Vexery cruiser took a direct hit to its engine section and started spinning out of control. Across the battlefield, similar scenes were playing out. Human ships struck hard and fast, hitting enemy vessels before they could fully power up their defenses. It was working better than anyone had expected, but it wasn't enough. The Vexery were recovering. Shields flickered to life. Weapons began to return fire. And human ships started to die. The destroyer Horizon took a direct hit and exploded in a ball of fire. The cruiser Morning Star lost half its crew to a single torpedo. Ship after ship vanished from Daniel's display, replaced by nothing but debris and silence. We're taking heavy losses, Nicole reported, her voice tight with strain. We've destroyed maybe 200 enemy ships, but we've lost 40 of our own. At this rate, we'll be gone in less than an hour. Daniel nodded grimly. How long until the pulse? 3 minutes. Then we hold for 3 minutes. Tell all ships to stay alive any way they can. 2,000 miles below, Dr. Amanda Walsh stood at the control panel of the gravitational pulse emitter. The machine was humming with power, building toward a peak that her instruments could barely measure. Warning lights were flashing everywhere. The entire mountain was shaking. Power levels are critical, her assistant warned. If we push it any higher, the whole system might overload. Amanda shook her head. We push it higher. We push it as high as it will go. This is our only chance. She watched the countdown on her screen. 30 seconds. 20. 10. Everyone brace yourselves, she said quietly. Then she pressed the button. The pulse erupted from the emitter like a silent earthquake. It raced outward at the speed of light, an invisible wave of gravitational distortion to pass through everything in its path. On Earth, people felt nothing. The pulse was designed to affect electronics, not living things. But in orbit, the effect was immediate and devastating. Vexry ships went dark. Navigation systems failed. Engines misfired. Communication networks collapsed into static. Thousands of warships that had been moments away from victory suddenly found themselves blind. Deaf and helpless on the Defiant, Captain Cole watched in amazement as the enemy cruisers in front of him went completely dead. Their lights went out. Their weapons stopped firing. They drifted through space like dead leaves on a pond. It worked, he breathed. Holy hell, it actually worked. All ships, Daniel's voice crackled over the communication system. The pulse was successful. Enemy fleet is disabled. Press the attack. Press the attack now. Earth's remaining ships surged forward. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but for the first time since the battle began, they had the advantage. Enemy ships that couldn't see or shoot back were easy targets. The next 6 hours were the longest and bloodiest in human history. The pulse didn't affect all the Vexry ships equally. Some recovered faster than others. Some had been too far away to feel the full effect. The battle was still brutal, still desperate, still balanced on a knife's edge. Daniel commanded from the bridge of the Resolute, directing his remaining ships with cool precision. Nicole identified targets. Benjamin led attack runs. Sarah kept the engines running long past the point when they should have failed. Ships died on both sides. Heroes were made and lost in the space of heartbeats. A destroyer captain named Maria Santos rammed her crippled ship into an enemy battle cruiser, destroying both vessels and saving 3 other human ships. A young pilot named Eric North flew his damaged fighter directly into an alien communication array, cutting off coordination for an entire enemy squadron. By noon, Earth's fleet had been cut in half. 87 ships destroyed. Over 4,000 sailors dead. But the Vexry had lost far more. 3,000 of their warships were gone, disabled or retreating. Their perfect formation had shattered into chaos. On the Vexry flagship, High Commander Zorath stared at his display in disbelief. This was not possible. This was not how conquest worked. He had destroyed civilizations. He had broken empires. He had never, in 50 years of war, lost 3,000 ships in a single day. Sir, Tovak said quietly, our losses are approaching 25%. At this rate, we will lose the entire forward fleet within another 10 hours. Zorath said nothing. He was thinking about the human admiral's message, about the promise that every human death would cost them something, about the warning that they would regret this fight. He had not believed it then. He believed it now. Signal the fleet, he said finally. Pull back to safe distance. Reorganize. We need to reassess this situation. Tovak looked shocked. Sir, we still outnumber them 8-1. We can still win. I know we can win, Zorath replied coldly. The question is whether winning is worth the cost. Now do as I say. Back on Earth, people watched the battle through whatever cameras still worked. They saw the alien fleet retreating. They saw their own ships, battered and broken, holding their position. They saw something that no one had expected. They saw humanity winning. Admiral Daniel Carter slumped in his chair, exhausted beyond words. His uniform was stained with sweat and smoke. His hands were shaking, but his eyes were bright. All ships, this is the Admiral. The enemy is retreating. Repeat, the enemy is retreating. Hold your positions and catch your breath. We're not done yet, but we just did the impossible. He looked out at the stars, at the debris fields, and the distant enemy ships, and the blue marble of Earth floating below. "We hurt them," he said quietly. "We actually hurt them." The battle was not over. But for the first time since the Vexery arrived, humanity had hope. The silence lasted 12 hours. Earth's surviving ships held their positions, watching the distant Vexery fleet with exhausted eyes. 113 vessels remained from the original 200. Their hulls were scarred. Their crews were drained. But they were still there, still ready, still refusing to break. Admiral Daniel Carter used those 12 hours to prepare for the next assault. He redistributed ammunition. He repaired what could be repaired. He held memorial services for the fallen, reading the names of 4,000 sailors who had given everything to protect their home. But the second assault never came. Instead, at exactly midnight, a transmission reached Earth from beyond the Vexery fleet. It did not come from High Commander Zorth. It came from the Dominion Council itself, the rulers of an empire that stretched across 1,000 star systems. The message played on every screen on Earth, just as the first one had. But this time, the tone was different. "People of Earth, the Vexery Dominion has conquered 417 worlds. We have defeated species more numerous than your population. We have broken civilizations more ancient than your history. No world has ever successfully resisted our terms." There was a pause. When the voice continued, it sounded almost confused. "Until now, in one day, you destroyed 3,000 of our warships. You killed 60,000 of our soldiers. You inflicted more damage on our fleet than we have suffered in the last 50 years combined. Our analysts cannot explain this. Our strategists cannot model your behavior. You were outnumbered 60 to 1. You should have surrendered. Instead, you fought as if victory was certain." Another pause. "We do not understand your species. Your actions defy all logic. Your resistance makes no mathematical sense. You chose certain death over submission, and somehow that choice changed the outcome. The Dominion Council has decided to withdraw from your system. We still possess the forces to destroy you. That has not changed. But the cost of victory is no longer acceptable. We came here expecting an easy conquest. Instead, we found something we have never encountered before. You have taught us that some prey is not worth hunting." The message ended with coordinates for future diplomatic contact. Should Earth ever wish to speak with the Dominion as equals, not as subjects, not as slaves, as equals. On the bridge of the Resolute, Admiral Carter listened to the message twice. When it was done, he turned to Nicole, who had tears streaming down her face. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it." Daniel shook his head slowly. "No, we all did it. Everyone. Every ship. Every sailor. Every person on Earth who refused to give up." He walked to the communication panel and opened a channel to all remaining ships. "This is Admiral Carter. I just received word from the Dominion Council. They're withdrawing. Repeat, the enemy is withdrawing. We have won." The cheering was so loud it seemed to shake the ship. On Earth, the sound was even greater. 8 billion people, who had spent the last day preparing to die, suddenly realized they were going to live. The celebrations lasted for days. People danced in the streets. Strangers embraced. Old enemies shook hands. For one shining moment, all the divisions that had separated humanity seemed to disappear. There was only one people, one world, one victory. President Laura Mitchell addressed the world on the third day. She stood in front of the United Nations building, surrounded by the flags of every nation on Earth. Her voice was strong and clear. 3 days ago, we faced extinction. An enemy with 12,000 warships told us to surrender or die. They gave us no hope. They expected no resistance. They thought we were weak. She paused and looked at the sky, where the last of the alien ships were disappearing into the darkness. They were wrong. We lost 4,000 brave men and women in the battle. 87 ships. Scientists and engineers and volunteers who gave their lives for a chance at victory. We will never forget them. We will never stop honoring them. They are the reason we're standing here today. But this victory was not won by soldiers alone. It was won by every single person who refused to give up. The factories that worked through the night. The scientists who built the impossible. The ordinary people who helped their neighbors and kept their hopes alive. You won this battle. All of you. Her voice softened. The galaxy knows about us now. They know what we are. They know that humanity does not surrender. Not to fear. Not to odds. Not to anyone. And they know that if they come for us again, we will be ready. Our task now is to make sure this never happens again. We must build. We must grow. We must reach for the stars, not as victims, but as equals. The universe is vast and dangerous, and we are very small. But today we proved that size does not determine courage. Today we proved that the human spirit cannot be conquered. Let the stars remember this day. Let them remember that Earth stood and Earth survived, and Earth will always fight for its place among them. In the years that followed, Earth changed. The planet that had been divided by borders and languages and old hatreds came together as never before. A unified government emerged. A new fleet was built, 10 times larger than the one that had fought the Vexery. The gravitational pulse technology was refined and expanded, giving humanity a weapon that made even powerful empires think twice. Admiral Daniel Carter was promoted to commander of all Earth forces. Nicole Patterson became the youngest admiral in history. Benjamin Cole led the new exploration fleet that pushed beyond the solar system for the first time. Dr. Amanda Walsh received every scientific honor humanity could offer. But they all agreed that the real heroes were the ordinary people, the ones who had worked and hoped and refused to quit, the ones who had shown that humanity's greatest weapon was not technology or numbers, but the simple, stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Alliances were forged with other species who had suffered under Dominion rule. Trade routes opened. Knowledge was shared. Humanity took its first steps into a galaxy that was larger and stranger and more wonderful than anyone had imagined. And throughout that galaxy, a new phrase entered the common language of 1,000 civilizations. It was spoken with respect, sometimes with fear, always with a certain amazement. Never corner a human. They do not know when they are beaten, and they will make you pay for teaching them. 50 years after the battle, an old man sat in a garden on Earth, watching his grandchildren play. He was 93 years old, his hair white, his hands spotted with age. But his eyes were still sharp, still bright with the fire that had burned in them since the day the aliens came. A young girl ran up to him, her face full of curiosity. "Grandpa Daniel, tell us the story again. Tell us about the day the aliens came." Daniel Carter smiled and pulled his granddaughter onto his lap. He looked up at the sky, where starships now passed as commonly as airplanes once had. The universe was open to humanity now. The future stretched out before them, vast and bright and full of possibility. "Well," he said softly, "it all started on a Tuesday morning, when the sky went dark, and as the sun set over a world that had refused to die, he began to tell the story. The story of 12,000 warships and 200 brave ships. The story of impossible odds and unbreakable will. The story of the day humanity looked extinction in the eye and simply said, no. It was a story that would be told for 1,000 generations. And it would always end the same way. Humanity did not flinch. The end.